Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And today we are at episode 51, and we're calling it Don't Talk About This at Work.
You don't know how many times I've actually heard that face to face, pulled aside in person. It's a perfect topic for me, the man who overshares. So.
Well, and I want to talk about, there's a lot of ways we could take this, and I want to be very specific. And first of all, I want to set the context, right? So Eugene and I are of a certain age, and we started working in the late 80s. That's when we entered the corporate world. And over the time doing this podcast, we've talked about how norms have changed, how understandings have changed. And there's a lot of changes that are good. I don't want to go back to the way it was in the 80s or the 90s or, previous eras. However, there's one thing I think we should bring back, which is you don't talk about religion or politics at work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I learned growing up. Like when you are out socially, if you're at a dinner party, you don't talk about politics or religion. You just don't.
I would have said, I would have crapped on that up till about, up to about 2016. When the kind of the interaction between social media and this kind of hothouse election in 2016 with the attendant riots in the street, it's not the business. It's not the business of the business at this point to have people who, friendships have been ended routinely since 2016, and you can't run a workplace like that. So
right. And I think the reason for this is that, at work, we are not family. Often these people are not actually your friends. In many cases, for many people, work is just shy of a hostile work environment. You might get laid off. You might have to really be careful about protecting your reputation, keeping your job. And so you want to avoid topics that are going to incite dislike, animus, whatever, as much as possible.
But do you realize, is there a possibility that it's our age that causes us to feel this change more keenly? Because a 28-year-old guy who I know actually said these words to me today. He said, "Hey, my CEO is my buddy." And I said, "Do you mean you had a social relationship prior to working there?" He goes, "No, he's become my buddy." And I was like, "You poor, sad son of a, your
Right.
buddy. Okay.
Well,
But he's 28. So maybe the propensity to be in that age grouping to believe something like that is great. He might find this entire show strange because naturally he feels like he can talk to his buddy about anything.
right. Until his buddy needs to make cuts and he's on a riff list, and then he's going to revise that. And the way that I think about it is there are many things that I think we as older people need to let go of. Right. And I don't think either one of us are those people that say, oh, back in the day, it was better. Right. But I was listening to, I like to listen to the Savage Love, this podcast by Dan Savage about sex and relationships. And he was talking about the fact that younger people don't know how to meet potential sexual partners in person. And he talks about young gay men being in a gay bar, looking at across the room, seeing a guy they find attractive, and then getting on their phones and seeing if the guy's on Grindr. Right? And there's actually people, he was interviewing a guy, I can't remember his name, who was talking about trying to encourage young gay men to do analog flirting. Go and here's how to go out in the world and pick someone up.
Yeah, right.
And these are skills that we learned because there was no app. Right. Yep. And I think that there are a lot of things that we learned how to do, or norms, many of which are outdated. But this one, don't talk about politics and religion at work, I think should be brought back. I think there should be an analog appreciation for the fact that, like, old school, there's a reason for this.
Why? Well, in current day, why would you say this? Why?
I think.
Did you see the confirmation hearing today? Is that not an acceptable?
I think there's two. I think there's two different buckets of talking about politics, right? And the idea is this a conversation that makes sense to have, with people at work. There are a lot of people, many, many people right now who are dramatically and disastrously impacted by the decisions that the current administration is making. So you cannot help but talk about the executive orders and the decisions that are being made if you work for the federal government, if you're in healthcare, if you work in any sort of nonprofit role working with the Latino community or the trans community. There's many, many places where your job, your survival, your livelihood, your physical safety is impacted by the decisions of the current administration. To me, that's not talking about politics, that's talking about policy. What I'm talking about is who did you vote for and how's that working out for you now?
Right.
And the reason that I don't think who did you vote for and how that is working out for you now is it is just too sensitive. It's just too charged. And there's no reason for it. Right. So here's an example. Obviously, you're going to see in the first bucket, a lot of people have been talking about the fact that the Park Service, National Park Service, a lot of people have been laid off, right? And particularly in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of conversation about the impact. I can't go to this place and this trail is whatever, right? That to me is talking about policy and policy impacts. If someone were to go to work and say to a coworker something along the lines of, and I would never say this, but something along the lines of like, oh, right. So you didn't want to vote for her because you didn't like Biden's policies on Palestine? How's that working out for the Palestinians now?
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, Trump is talking about moving people out of Gaza and the U.S. taking over Gaza. That's a war crime. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. That may be a legitimate conversation for you to have with friends or even family. Don't talk about that with your coworker because what's going to happen, right? That is obviously a sensitive issue. They are going to have whatever concern they have for whatever region of the world they are, interested in or advocating for. Yeah. To say it's basically the kind of playground version of like, neener told you so.
Yeah, right.
Right? Even for people that voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need to point out to them that, hey, guess what? The price of eggs is not going down because they can go to their local store just like you and I can, and it's $10 for a dozen eggs.
It seems to me, though, since we have this kind of weird both-sidism thing happening in America since Charlottesville, that, if you think what's happening is great, that you are welcome to say so in the modern workplace. And if you are somehow sanctioned for it, and you won't be, there's probably a sort of unstated understanding that this could get up-leveled in an uncomfortable way for the people, the executive people who might not disagree with you, but who realize as they line up to, kiss the ring, that it's a new America. If you get what I'm saying.
Well,
I mean, Silicon Valley with guys like T.J. Rogers and Peter Thiel and now Bezos and Musk have are now to a certain degree unleashed, right? So if I were to say something like was said to me today about cutting the Forest Service, somebody said, "Well, now at least I'll be able to go to Yosemite." I love it. And this guy went to work, and I'm sure he repeated that line. And they are probably terrified to fire him because of a changed political environment. So, I mean, it's good for us to talk about this, but in other words, I think what I'm inching up to is there a way to have these discussions if you're not part of the dominant paradigm, which at this point is, insanely right-wing Republican?
I guess I'm making some assumptions.
Okay.
So we have, by the way, gotten a number of new subscribers. Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. We're glad you're here. My assumption is that they're not showing up and listening to us if they are oligarchs. Just a guess. Right? Our number of multimillionaires is probably fairly low. I'm assuming that the people that are interested in what we have to say are people who need to go to work, are trying to be better bosses, are have an intention to either work for, create, or participate in a slightly more functional and helpful environment than corporate America in late stage capitalism allows them. So I am assuming a level of intention, right?
Right. Okay.
I feel like what I'm saying to those people is there's no reason for you to engage in politics at all, regardless of what your politics are, right? So it's entirely possible there are people listening to us who voted for him and not her, right? And it is entirely possible for those people to recognize, I don't want to participate in what's happening. I don't want to make people feel worse. And I think there's nuances too. Like one of the things that I've noticed, so living in lefty liberal Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, I have been in social situations, not professional situations, but I've been in social situations with a group of people where there's an assumption we all voted for her. So we're all having the same response to what's happening politically. And I saw something really interesting in a conversation among friends where there were people, myself among them, who were bemoaning the dismantling of our democracy. Like, this is very bad. Then there were people who were saying, we should all get along. I don't want to watch the news. I'm really trying to protect myself from that. I am not, like, can't we all just get along? What difference does it make?
Right.
We all voted for the same person, but we are approaching this in a really different way. And so I think the idea is we could have had an argument, right? This is a time for all good people to come to the aid of their country, get out of protest, take social action, do something. We could have been arguing with the people who were like, well, let's all try to get along. Let's not have more animosity and fighting. But we voted for the same person. We might vote for the same person again. And again, this is not an appropriate conversation to have at work because my guess is that most people are, as they say in psychological terminology, highly activated. Right. And I think also recognizing, that, and this is a, sort of call out to people who have a lot of privilege, myself being one of them, is it's a very bad place for people who are not white, male, cis, Christian Republicans. And that's a lot of people. And some people are afraid that they are going to be physically harmed. It's pretty bad. So I think, but I think also I wanted to talk just quickly about two other areas, right? So religion, just lightly, but I also want to talk about a third category that I think we should add to the list of things we don't talk about at work, and that's bodies. Right? So let me just touch quickly on the religion thing. So I am a religious person. I am spiritual. I don't talk about it at work. And
I try not to talk about it ever.
Okay. And I think it's a place, and I think what happens at work, I've seen circumstances, and a lot of people don't, right? But I think it depends on where you are in the country. Like, I was having a meeting where I was asked to meet with someone else's executive coach, right? So it wasn't a coaching session. It wasn't confidential. We were talking about work things. And what we were talking about had zero to do with spirituality or religion. And a woman who was in Texas, who was a coach, asked me if Jesus Christ was my personal savior. Now, it so happens that I do believe in Jesus. I am a Christian, but I was so taken aback by that. And I was like, oh, in your world, this is a totally appropriate way of having a conversation, right? And I think that there are areas of the country where, just as in many places it is assumed that everyone is straight and heteronormativity is discussed and people talk about their relationships with their opposite sex spouse, I think for some people, the assumption is that you are Christian and you are going to use that terminology. What I have found in my work history is that there are people who are religious. They're usually pretty quiet about it. And the way that you find out is somebody says, why doesn't so-and-so drink any alcohol? Well, they participate in a religious tradition that issues alcohol? Why do they not work on Saturdays? Right? Like, why are they not here? It's the high holy days. And I'm not talking about that. It's not like you're hiding it. But I think the idea, and one of the ways that I've seen this happen, which is kind of unexpected, is I have had people complain to me that as Christians, they have gotten grief for wearing a crucifix. And I'm like, you know what? If you are a member of the dominant group, you don't get to complain about people having an attitude. I mean, I wear a crucifix. You do not see it. I do not wear it to work. It is not, kind of anybody's business. So I think that it's recognizing that, again, I think we understand we're not going to come and try to convert somebody to our religious, thing or necessarily invite them to church. But spirituality is broad. A lot of times people will talk about Reiki or raw food or being a vegan. And I think it's the same thing. Like, we don't want to have conversations where we are trying to convert someone, whether it's a way of eating, a way of believing, your nomenclature for the divine, or participating in a 12-step program. None of those things are appropriate to be discussing at work, right? No argument there, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm yeah. In fact, but I mean, my reasons for saying no argument there are purely selfish because I just don't want to hear it. So, it doesn't have to do with the job at hand. So I don't really want to hear about it. So, yeah.
But I think the last one, so what I want to talk about is this idea of bodies, right? So I think people used to talk about bodies all the time at work, right? Everything from I like your haircut to have you lost weight to, I can't believe you still haven't had that baby. You're so pregnant, it looks like you've got a basketball under your shirt. True story. So that movement away from that, I think, has happened, but I still think it doesn't go far enough. And so here are some ideas. Like, I think we all know now that we do not say to a woman who has a belly, when are you due? Because she may not be pregnant. Right? I think we understand that. But I think there's a lot of ways in which people talk about bodies that are less, that I think we need to be mindful of. So, for example,
what are you going to do this weekend, Eugene? I don't know. Maybe you're going to go work on your tan. It's not a tan. I froze that up right away. 1991, somebody let off. I go, it's not a tan. Didn't smile, didn't make it less uncomfortable. I just let it lay there. And the guy goes, well, you know what I mean. I go, actually, I don't know what you mean. And just let it hang there.
And that's also, I mean, that's just racist. But I think that
I'm not going to even go that far. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear you make a comment about me that others me. I'm not interested. So
and I think too that sometimes those, again, a comment about bodies can be very discriminatory, right? People that come up to me like, oh, I just love your gray hair. I could never let my hair go gray. It's like, how is that germane? Right? Like, I don't need your congratulations and approval for how I wear my hair or how I dress or what size my body is. Right. And I think that there's a lot of ways in which, women face this a lot. What's the matter with you? You look so down. Why don't you smile? You look tired. If you're concerned about someone's health or well-being, you can ask them, how are you? Open-ended question. Maybe they don't want to tell you. Another example that I've heard, and I've heard this from sort of younger friends, is don't talk about sex at work. Unless, you're a doctor or a porn star. You don't need to be talking about sex at work. And I have heard people say they'll make a casual cultural reference to a celebrity and a sex act, this, that, or the next thing. When I say don't talk about bodies, I mean the whole spectrum. You don't need to talk about. And I also don't talk about your bodies. No one wants to hear about your surgery or your food allergies.
I have to say, there was an interesting moment that I had at my job before last, which was a media job. We were talking about coverage, And where it also should be noted that I did the sex column called Sex with Eugene. And at one point, I was talking in the open office format to someone about whether or not we should cover the John Hamm issue. And somebody said, John Hamm? So, yeah, apparently John Hamm is well endowed enough to have to require special tailoring. And it was something that we had, you know, Time Magazine was writing about it. We should also write about it. And uh, almost immediately, my boss called me into the office and goes, "Do not talk about this." I said, "Yeah, but we're running the piece on it." He goes, "Yeah, you can run the piece, but I don't want you to talk about it." I said, "Okay." And that was the end of that. Um, I thought, given that we were media purveyors and it was part of the media discussion, that that is something that us who are in the business of making media should be allowed to talk about in the office. But I was not going to die on that hill.
That is interesting because if they're going to be carved outs for people who are talking about, reproductive health,
Yeah.
is there a carve out for people who are talking about culture? I think there
Mhm.
possibly could be, but the
Mhm.
situation that I was being told about was not in that. There was no,
Right, right,
it
right,
was
right, right.
just like a random conversation about a sex position, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
and
that's
was
right. That's right. Yeah, yeah,
apropos of nothing, right?
yeah. Right, right.
And I think also I'm reading this great book. It's called The Defiant Middle by
Mhm,
Kaya Oakes, who teaches at UC Berkeley.
mhm,
And she's talking about different kind of ideas around that women have faced throughout the centuries.
mhm,
And one of the things she says is she does a lot of public speaking and readings, and she is always asked the same question
mhm.
every time, every place she goes, which is, do you have children?
Hmm.
And she says it doesn't matter if she's in a, kind of like large bookstore or talking to a bunch of nuns.
Hmm.
Everyone always asks her that. And Rebecca Tracer was saying the same thing.
Right.
Men are not always asked that. Women are
Hmm.
always asked that. As it turns out, she does not have children.
Mhm,
But the reason that she brings it up is there is an assumption that as women, we are going to have children. And that is always seen as sort of the first place in what it is that, like and I've done that too,
mhm.
like, oh, do you have kids? Or it
Yeah,
can, in a dinner party, maybe.
yeah,
In
yeah.
a professional situation, what it does, yeah. And what she points out is that, are we assuming that a woman has less value if she does not have children?
Mhm,
Would we
mhm,
ask that question of a male author who was doing a reading? And
mhm,
then, as she points out, what about, I mean, she has chosen to be childless, but what about women who have not been able to have biological children, who have
mhm.
suffered miscarriages? What about someone whose kid has died? Like, people
Yeah.
ask me that all the time. How many kids do you have? Do you have kids? Yes. How many kids do you have?
Mhm,
And I'm like, do I say I had a son who died and a daughter? Do I just go straight to the daughter?
mhm,
Like, this is one of those things where it's like there's a complexity and often a
mhm,
woundedness that many people carry around fertility, parenthood, their bodies, what
mhm,
might have happened to their bodies. And I think it's one of those areas where we are being well meaning, we are
mhm.
trying to forge a bond, but in a professional circumstance, I think it's better to err on the side of caution and discretion.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. For a long, long time in the workplace, my standard lie, and this is in advance of Google having put everybody on Front Street for everything. If you're interested in somebody, you type the name in Google, and all the stuff that you could keep secret before would come up. And people would say, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I would say the same thing. I would say, "Gardening." Because nothing else was going to get me a raise. If I said I got band practice and we have a show, ultimately that's a nice gossipy item for the workplace. Never got me a raise. I never got a raise because I was in a band. So as long as possible, and this is somewhere through the '90s, I would just say gardening, and that really worked. And I remember I was at Corporate Computing Magazine when it stopped working, and some guy said, "Oh, I saw online, or maybe it was maybe later than that. I saw that you were playing, and I had there was a picture of me wearing the shirt that I was wearing at work when the guy questioned me and I go, "Oh, we get confused a lot." And he looked at me like, "Are you crazy or am I crazy?" And I just looked at him, and the subtext being, "This is not going to get me a raise here." And at this point, and then of course, since the ascendancy of Google, internet culture, you can't hide it anymore. So it stopped being a point of concern. But I still didn't like, the last job. I still didn't like disclosing. I was not. I just knew it wasn't going to help me. It was, and like you say, not pals, we're not friends. These are people that we work with. So,
And there's a self-protection aspect to it too, right?
exactly.
Protecting yourself and others. Like I have never been one to talk about my body at work. And it is not unusual for women to talk about their bodies, right? That's something we do. We complain about menstrual cramps or, borrow a tampon from someone. We talk about perimenopause. We talk about menopause. That's positive in its place. But generally at work, the trope of a woman's body is unreliable and an older woman's body is doubly unreliable and somehow repugnant is not something I have chosen to participate in by ever talking about, those hormonal changes at work.
Yeah.
People really disagree with me. A lot of people feel like, women say being able to talk about perimenopause and the fact that it's everywhere is really reassuring for me. And that's helpful. And I think that's great outside of the workplace.
Right.
Because there is enough shit that I deal with as a 62-year-old woman trying to make a living adjacent to corporate America. So I don't need to make it worse by reminding people that our bodies are undergoing processes that are not happening to men our age in the same way. It's self-protection. So I think with all of these things, staying away from talking about religion, politics, and bodies is going to help you, because the reality is the United States of America is becoming a hostile work environment for many, many people who used to be okay. And I don't think that's going to change. And the idea of just being a little bit more cautious, a little bit more self-protective, I think is going to be useful.
I had an employee once tell me that she was having her breast enlarged, and I didn't like the conversation going there. I thought it was unnecessary that I know that, and then I mean I didn't want to be a scold and say that's this is not. I didn't want to be a scold, but at the same time I was sort of disappointed and unpleasant that I was drawn into a closer personal relationship with this person than I wanted. I just want you to do your work. I don't need to know this other thing. But I knew kind of sort of instinctively that were I to have called her on it, it would have sent an unpleasant chill through the workplace. But in my mind, it was a minefield. I mean, yeah, I don't care about that. And I want to move beyond it. I'm focused on the job. But then she mentions it to an age parallel coworker or an age adjacent coworker, some guy who was in his 20s. And then all of a sudden I got a situation. Right. So it's an interesting. I would rather err on the side that you're suggesting of never ever talking about it, because there are just too many weird exceptions and things that, and then of course there's a whole issue of, as people begin to work relationships, because nobody's leaving at 5 anymore. So work relationships go to 6:30. Hey, do you want to grab some dinner? People saying stuff, work related stuff outside of, and then they feel like, well, I'm having dinner with these people. Why can't I talk about the breast enlargement I've just had? Or alternatively, it's super difficult and really complex. As
and again, I'm sure there are going to be younger people who are rolling their eyes and thinking, "Okay, boomer," even though we are not boomers.
Yeah,
we are not boomers.
Yeah.
I understand that. However, I would just invite you to consider if there are ways that you can be more skillful around some of these topics, if only to spare some of your coworkers difficulty that we don't need to bring to one another. All right. Did you have a fire me? Anything else? Or are we done?
There's a curious thing. There was a young guy who I know who is working for a startup, and he's been there for 2 years, and he's on the verge of getting an offer from a major, large Silicon Valley. Like, you've heard, everybody's heard of right?
Right.
People who work there routinely becoming millionaires and so on. And he has said, I don't know if I'm going to take it. There's a possible upside with the startup. If they go public, I've got options, very similar to my boss is my pal. And we are all ganging up on him saying, take the money celebrity gig here, because even if you last there 2 years, what's on the resume is what carries you into the future, and failed startup doesn't carry you too far into the future. And I feel somehow like I'm being a bad parent by doing that, because what he's saying is, I am happy where I am. Why would I go to this major company and I can't come up with any reason that's not cynical outside of money, stock, that it looks good, it impresses people, you can get another job more easily. But I think there's a certain amount of calculation that goes in. That's not really a fire me, but let's just call it an end thought. And I talked to his brother today and said, you got to work on this kid. You can't let him walk by this. This is ridiculous. And then I even felt bad for doing that. So,
well, and I totally disagree with you. I think if he's happy, he should stay there. And then also, I think there's a new moral dimension right now given the ascendancy of the oligarchs, given what is happening with the, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. I could see people making a decision in good conscience that they're not going to participate in an ecosystem that makes those men wealthier.
Good.
Right?
I
mean, that is, the idea of choosing.
But it wasn't one of those companies. So,
okay. But I mean, I could see people, and I think too that there's this idea of like, that's what my dad told me. He's like, you have to go to Stanford because you got into it. And you have to go because you're going to meet people that will be influential for the rest of your life. I wanted to go to the University of Maryland because my father was dying and he was living in Maryland, right? I went to Stanford like he told me. I wish I'd had 2 years closer to him, right? Yeah. And so I think that idea of like the only focus isn't always the best.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. On that note.
I'll tell him that. I came to Stanford because I knew the name would do it for me, whereas Wesleyan, maybe the name is there, so, and with Stanford, I've been right, but did I like it? No, I didn't like it. Yeah. So,
and we both have that on our resume, and that has benefited us both clearly. Yeah, so, not complaining. All right. If you'd like to get in touch, if you totally disagree with us, if you have ideas for things you'd like us to talk about, WTF@badbossbrief.com. I read every email and hope to hear from you soon. And we will be back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's number 3, on Instagram. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. We personally answer every submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.